Hey guys, you're tuning in to the Legacy Men's Podcast, made by men, for men. Young or old, broken, or firm in your foundation. Join us every episode for testimonies from all walks of life. Just as iron sharpens iron, man sharpens man. Enjoy the episode, men.
Yeah! Good afternoon. My name is Gary Trevor, and welcome to the Legacy Men's Podcast here at the Depot at Cornerstone Church.
Hey, welcome, y'all. My name is Jason Gonzalez. Welcome to the Legacy Men's Podcast. Please make sure you subscribe there on YouTube, and then don't forget to follow us as well on Spotify if you'd like to listen. And also click that notification bell so that you get alerts of the next posts. Today we have Grant Brown, and we'll be talking about understanding youth better. Grant, could you just walk us through a little bit just about why you picked this topic, just so that we can kind of figure out like what you know about youth and how you're engaged with them currently.
Yeah, absolutely. So the topic makes sense considering what I get to do. I get to be a high school pastor. And my hope is that through this conversation that maybe there is a dad listening or a parent listening who finds a new way to engage with a student who so desperately wants to engage and be in relationship with them, and give them the courage to not give up no matter what kind of pushback they might feel like they're getting from their student at home.
Nice.
And Grant, we talked about, I'd love to hear from you about the survey you did a couple of months ago at your high school class. Kind of run us through what you did, the response you got back, which even surprised you, and the percentages of the cry-outs from the young people.
Yeah, so as you can imagine, high school students love taking surveys, which is never really the case. I had been asked to find out the answer to the question, if you could say anything to your parents anonymously, what would you say? And it was very, very anonymous in terms of it was just a white slip of paper with that question prompt at the top.
Wow.
And then whoever wants to take the survey, please take the survey. And we're going to tell your parents. And when they realized it was that level of anonymous, I was thinking maybe 10 to 15 students would participate. But of about the 100 or so students we had, 90 of them came and grabbed the slip of paper and actually really filled it out. What's hard when you do an open-ended kind of like question like that is you never really know what categories you're going to get. So I was kind of nervous about that. Then going through it, I realized there were very, very clearly 4 major categories of what our students would say to their parents if they could do it anonymously. The primary thing we heard, and this goes for parents who are probably like, they're still together, 40% of our students said, "Did you know that I can hear you fighting?" Wow. Or did you know that like your conflict really bothers me? And that was a really clear category that we were seeing. We also saw clearly that 30% of our students said, "I wish you spent more time with me," which I don't know if I expected that much of a response in that way.
That's amazing.
And then another close to 30% said, "I wish you would take more interest in me." And then everything else, because a lot of students wrote multiple things, because if you're doing math, we're already at 100%. A lot of students would basically say something like, "Hey, I wish my mom or dad spent more time with me, and I wish they knew about the way that I think about myself, my internal dialogue, the mental health things I'm navigating. I wish they knew that I was considering self-harm or that I was actively pursuing self-harm." And the number of students that wanted to respond and then how honest they were in the responses, it just blew my mind. I didn't expect that at all.
So this for your youth group specifically, we're talking about ages 15 to 18, or what's the pulse there as far as where they're at?
We took this at the beginning of the school year, so we would have seen 14 all the way up through probably 17, maybe a couple of like older seniors might have been in that 18 range, but the vast majority would have been like young freshmen through young seniors in high school.
Wow. Yeah. And what's interesting about that is I just keep hearing different facts about the statistics behind self-harm going up into younger ages, right?
Yeah.
So up like all the way to the ages of 13, they start that inner dialogue that you were talking about.
Absolutely. Our junior high ministry did a similar survey with their students, and they saw almost the exact same thing. it was alarming how many students were considering self-harm, or were just talking about, I wish they knew about how I'm feeling in my mental health. And I mean, I remember, I'm not that much older than our students, and I don't even think I had the language when I was their age to talk about mental health as clearly as they do, which I think is a good thing that we're talking about it. We're giving them language to put around how they're feeling, and I think that helps us better understand what our students are going through. But it is at an alarming rate a primary point of conversation that they seem to be having.
Okay. And just take us back to your upbringing. Love for the listeners to learn a little bit more about you, and just kind of where you may have started with your faith, but as well as just, walk us through your childhood.
Yeah. So my parents split when I was really little, like 3 years old. My mom's side of the family was a rather devout family. My grandfather was an elder for as long as I could remember in his local church. My mom made it a priority after the divorce that we were going to be in church every weekend. I mean, we would drive 2 hours to go and be at my grandparents' church.
Wow.
My father's side of the family, I think there are elements that they really enjoyed Christianity, or they really enjoyed certain traditions. But when it comes to like my father's influence, I wouldn't necessarily say he's a Christian. He's just a Republican who then, as long as Christianity agrees with his political point of view, like he's a Christian as long as it still votes red. And so it creates a unique dynamic where I'm not really sure, right? So then growing up, I had two sets of things going on in my life. I had my mother's side of the family who earnestly wanted me to have men of God in my life who were teaching me what it means to be like a healthy type of like masculine, to teach me what it means, like how do you treat women as a man of God? How do you treat others as a man of God? What is honor, respect, and integrity? What does it look like to be a man who pursues God's own heart? And she made that a priority. So within my youth group experience as a kid, I had an incredible small group leader who was willing to teach me those things, an incredible youth pastor who was willing to get coffee with me regularly to talk through those things. And even like the little things, everything from how do you tie a tie to how do you ask a girl out to homecoming for the very first time and do it in a respectful and honorable way, right? Because my dad was more like the fun dad. He was like, "Oh, it's a weekend with my kids. Let's go to let's go on an adventure and have fun, and let me just like learn about you, son. But we're not gonna have difficult conversations. Even if like my mom said, "Hey, you need to talk to him about X, Y, or Z," it would be very quick, and then we would move on and go get ice cream. Yeah. It was never really. He was there, but that doesn't mean that he was fathering. Right. It doesn't mean that he was really having those conversations. And then eventually through the relationships that my mom had set up with me within the local church, and navigating the loss of my grandmother in junior high, I came to go, no, I want what Jesus has to offer. I want that hope. I want that new life that he has. And so junior high, I said, I want to have a personal relationship with Christ. And then later in high school, I said I wanted to I felt called into full-time ministry.
And was that at like a specific time in your life when you accepted Christ? Can you walk us through what that moment may have looked like, and anyone that may have been the largest impact in that decision?
Yeah. So my grandmother had just passed away of ALS. We had watched her navigate that and fight through that. And that's really, really difficult as a young person who has never really experienced death or loss in any real way other than like losing a pet when you're younger. Yeah. And so my father's side of the family and my mother's side of the family dealt with death and loss very differently. And the way that I saw my mom's side of the family navigate death as being, it's a real thing. Everyone experiences it, but because of who Christ is and the hope that we have of eternity, there's a different conversation that happens around loss.
Right.
Versus my father's side of the family, there was a variety of ways of coping. Some mostly unhealthy, some healthier than others, and no real meaningful conversation around death and then life after, or more importantly, a misunderstanding of the gospel in such a way where you walked with insecurity about, oh, where is grandma now? If there is something after.
Right.
And seeing how my mother's side of the family had conversations or talked about, I go, okay, I want what they have. And I remember this key conversation I had. My small group leader at the time, his name was Bill. He pulled me out of school and took me to this like awful little Mexican restaurant in a Midwest town in the middle of nowhere. And he took me out to lunch, and he just like asked me how I was doing, how I was processing. And he goes, so what do you think of the whole situation? And he goes, what do you think Jesus sees? And we had this incredible conversation. And by the end of that conversation, over an empty bowl of chips and salsa, I said, I think that was the moment I said yes to Christ. And then about 2 months later, after having more conversations, I was baptized. And I think sometimes you have to be, in my case, even though I knew all the right answers about who Jesus was, it wasn't until those types of conversations and the reality of those things that it really sunk in. It was like, am I saying yes to Jesus more than just knowing the right answers about
Correct.
Jesus?
Absolutely.
And that's when I felt like I really stepped into a personal and intimate relationship with him.
Grant, did you ever have any real challenges in your life where you questioned your faith, or you questioned God, or you got yourself into a pickle where you just kind of like regressed or drifted away, and then what brought you back? Or did you always just go from that conversion and just sail into seminary and go from there?
Yeah, I'm the perfect Christian.
I know you are. I figure you are. That's why we're delving in there.
I'm always up and to the right. No setbacks. No, so I think for any Christian, there's a variety of moments. I think for me, one of the very first real tests was in high school. And you're trying to navigate what are you going to do with the rest of your life, which as a 16, 17-year-old young man, you think that's the question you're answering, but that's not really the question you're answering. What question you're answering is more like, what's going to be the next step you take as you enter into adulthood?
Right.
But you put so much pressure on a young person to like figure out their whole life and their career path, and they just need to take that next step.
Who are you going to be almost?
Yes, and if you're wrong, you're a liar. Yeah. So what I'm navigating is I've done athletics all through high school. Athletics has been something I enjoy. It's helped make me who I am. There's leadership opportunities and personal growth stories and all those cool things that come with athletics. There's also finding your identity in it instead of in Christ.
Correct.
And then there's also seeking your earthly father's approval, at least in my case, instead of my heavenly father's approval. Right. And so junior year is when you start to have real conversations around, do I do athletics at the next level? And that is when you begin to start having conversations about where that might be or what offers you might entertain. And so I'm now beginning to have conversations towards the ends of my junior year of high school about what does that look like? Who's interested in me and where am I interested in going? Which would be fine, except I had already felt that there was a very clear call in my life to go into full-time ministry. And so now I'm navigating a part of my identity that's been so huge is athletics. It's been the key way that I've connected with my earthly father. It's been the only time I ever feel like I'm really hearing him say, hey, I'm proud of you. It's the only thing that I think matters to him. And now I'm having to choose, am I going to choose what my father will affirm, or am I going to choose the call I think my heavenly father is placing on my life?
Big stuff.
And that's a big thing to choose.
Yep.
Because it's in that moment where you begin to go, all right, God, I've never personally seen you, but I can see my dad and his disappointed look across the way as I'm saying out loud, I'm not interested in this Division I offer. No, I don't want to go to business school. I don't want to do the things that you would be proud of me for. I know you don't understand my faith, or I know you don't have the same type of faith that I do. But I'm going to go do this thing. And you're looking at this man who all you want is his approval. Yeah. All you've ever wanted to hear is, I'm proud of you.
That's true.
And you're seeing that disippointment. So for me, the first big one was in high school. I
just wanted to highlight there, just for listeners, because I mean, this is something that dads just do, right?
And don't do.
We're just so accustomed to it, whether we didn't get it from our father, right? So like with my dad, sometimes I wished he would have talked to me about, sports and how my day was at practice and been to a game or, some of those things. He was just really busy, with work or whatever he was dealing with. And then there's kind of, okay, so now I'm in the car. I just picked him up from practice, I'm talking about myself, and it's kind of like, hey, like you could have done this better. And like, hey, like you did this really good. And I'm so proud of you for scoring or doing that. And then you really don't ask that many other questions about, hey, like, how are you feeling after this? Like, where are your friendships at? Where's your, relationship with
like,
Jesus?
You're so much more.
They don't
than just
go
that.
together, right?
No.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like I wish so badly my dad would ask me questions like, hey, you did great one. My dad, you don't need to be my coach. Trust me, in the film room, coach already told me all the things told me what I did wrong or will do wrong.
Right.
But like, hey, ask me more about my friendships. Ask me more about my friend Bryce, who I told you a couple days ago is like going through a hard time. Like follow up with those things in my life.
Yeah.
Right.
Instead of asking me if you think Bryce is going to be a starter in the upcoming game. Like that's not like that's a big deal to me. But like Bryce is also trying to figure out if his parents are going to stay married through the end of the season.
Gosh, that's such a good point.
But
Yeah.
how am I?
Yeah.
Like, hey, Dad, have a conversation. How am I processing that? What do I think of that?
So asking questions, basically, Grant.
Ask
versus
really
making statements.
Yes, ask
Okay.
good questions because your student is looking for ways to talk to you, and if you ask a good question, the student like they want to talk to you, and they want you to challenge them with good questions. Not in a I got you way, but just hey, here's a question that would have been great for me. Grant, I know that when you were younger, Mom and I split up. You're watching your friend go through a divorce. How are you doing with that?
Right. Good question.
And then like, how is your friend doing? Do you feel like there's any moment you can talk with your friend about this? Are you talking with your friend about this?
Yeah.
That would have been a great question to
Right.
ask, and he could have helped me process that. But instead we didn't. We just talked about my new like PR at squat and what I was going to weigh in at when I went to this camp.
The other question you pointed out, which I think is very valid, we talked about this prior, talking to the child not in your comfort zone, but in their comfort zone. Kind of elaborate on that, because I think that's a very valid question for
Definitely.
young dads today. It really is. And moms as well, I should say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of power in how we choose to have strategic conversations with our students. It's kind of like having a board meeting in an office space versus a living room. There's a very
Right.
different feel about that conversation.
Yeah.
And is it possible that the way that you're having conversations and where you're having conversations is already setting up the direction of the conversation?
Right.
So is it possible that you going to where they feel safe and comfortable to have those conversations as opposed to where you feel safe and comfortable is the right decision? I think, and maybe this is just an assumption, I have to assume that there are some parents who pick their comfort or what they feel like they should be doing for themselves over sometimes what's the best way for me to handle this conversation with my child. Like, what does it look like for me to go where they feel safe? Because they'll welcome you into that safe space to have a safe conversation.
Right.
And they're going to actually look forward to that as opposed to you saying, hey, I'm going to pick how, when, and where when I feel most comfortable, and we're going to have the conversation. And you're like
Exactly. Old school.
old school. And I think there's a better way to have safe conversations and safe spaces where your student feels the most comfortable. And then from there, I think you'd be amazed at what could happen next.
It's just solid advice.
It
I mean,
is.
because you mentioned old school, and it's just it's the way that some of our parents were raised too,
Correct.
right? It's that
Yeah.
like when I would have a serious discussion, I just remember walking down the hall. I'd be like, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Here comes that conversation. And I would stand, at the foot of the bed. My dad would be sitting down. I mean, I can remember it like it's yesterday, right?
Wow.
And it would be them addressing me in their most comfortable place.
Did you ever get a rebuttal?
No.
Absolutely not.
No.
How dare you talk back?
Yeah, yeah. And I can't remember one time. Well, yeah, I do remember one time when my dad apologized to me for something that he didn't do well, and he came into my room, and that moment has stuck with me.
I mean,
That's
you remember
powerful.
Forever. Yep.
You remember it right now.
Yeah.
And just,
So a last question to that I think is really good. You brought up in our prior conversations, I don't want to be a burden, Dad or Mom, to you. They brought that, young people were talking about that, which just breaks my heart.
Yeah.
How I would be a burden to talk to my parents. So how have you negotiated that when talking to people, saying, you shouldn't be a burden. I'm your kid. You should just love me regardless, right?
yeah, no, I think that amazed me. Like being a youth pastor, there's moments where students will come up and have conversations with me. And then more often than not, their next step is really just having a meaningful conversation with their parents about the topic. Whether they're stressed out from school, they're trying to figure out how to like navigate their first breakup, or maybe there's something going on. And I want to partner with parents. Have you talked with Mom and Dad about this? No, I don't want to be a burden to them. And
It just blows my mind.
it does. And I think that's interesting because they're they're taking into account everything they see going on in their parents' life, and they think that's one more thing I'm putting on mom or dad's shoulders.
Correct, yeah.
Which I think, as the student, they think they're doing a kind thing on behalf of their parents, but they're actually not. They're removing an opportunity for a parent to parent, and there is growth there for both individuals there.
Yep.
And then I also think to myself, what has been said, or how have conversations like this gone in the past?
Yep.
Where the student, so many of them have come up and said, I'm a burden to my parents by doing this.
Right.
And I just think, how much do we affirm the difficult conversation? How much do we say, hey, I want to keep having conversations like this. Like, I really want to keep this dialogue going. And then the parents, as the adult, are we continually reopening the conversation? So it's not burdensome. This is what we do. We have great conversations about difficult things in life. And when there's moments for me to be like really firm with my student, I'm firm. But when there's just moments for me to ask good questions and just help them think critically through this topic, I'm also there for them as well.
Yeah.
I think as we come to a close, Jason and I have always asked our guests to leave behind an antidote that you feel would kind of hang in the air, so to speak, for our people to listen, to think about what you've learned that really hinges and really opened up a lot of doors for you. Do you have an antidote for our guests at all?
If you could do anything, it would be ask good questions.
Okay.
Ask really good questions and be really thoughtful and intentional.
Okay.
I think maybe you might be nervous as to what to say or how to do things, and just ask good questions and help your student think through things critically. Oh, you're navigating a breakup your student, you can see, is like having a difficult time in a relationship. Asking good questions like, hey, how are you and so doing? Oh, I noticed this. What do you see in my marriage that you think you like that, you don't like that? What are things that you see in your dating relationship that you do and you don't like? And you're not doing it where you're trying to trap them or you're trying to be judgy. You're just trying to ask good questions that walk them towards the types of outcomes you want them making as an adult.
Exactly. Good point.
And I think those are the types of really meaningful conversations they want to have.
Okay.
Instead of the yes, no, sure.
Yep.
And then one tiny PS to that is your student wants you off your phone just as much as you want them off their phone.
Very good. Very good.
So it's funny to me. It's like a standoff. But both of you want the same thing, which is quality time with one another.
Correct.
Desperately.
Yep.
So even if you feel like you're going to be like the annoying parent who says, hey, we're doing a cell phone free dinner from now on, or like we're going to go do this and we're going to leave our phones in the car intentionally, or whatever that might be, lead by example.
Correct.
Because ultimately they learn their technology skills from you.
Yep. Amen.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to just leave us with is, as well as I think you mentioned, helping them to understand what critical thinking, like how it can help them through life, right?
Very good.
After they leave your household and they have to start facing these things in the world. So I really appreciate you joining us, Grant. So guys, thank you so much for joining us today for this podcast about helping the next generation in youth. And from what you've heard, about living and leaving a godly legacy, it's very important for us to stay engaged. And address our children and ask questions and get curious, so that we can help impact this next generation.
Right.
Thank you very much. And don't forget to check us out on YouTube, subscribe there. And then as well as Spotify, you can find us there, follow us, and click that notification bell for the next post. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Grant, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it very much. Thank you so much.
Next time on the Legacy Men's Podcast.
Totally. And people have a misapplication of some of the verses in the New Testament, which make them feel like once they're saved, there is no spiritual warfare, there is no battle. Or if there is a battle, it's exclusively with the flesh. Because the Holy Trinity is Father, Son, Holy Spirit. The demonic Trinity is world, flesh, and devil. And so most people that I grew up with, if anything went wrong in their life, or they had a fight with their wife, or they made a mistake, or they watched pornography, or they gambled too much, or whatever men struggle with, they would think, okay, this is 100% between me and my flesh. But they wouldn't know, well, also, it's the evil system of the world that is making these things available to you. Then it is lies that you believe about them. Like take the gambling one, for instance. Oh, well, I'm just wired like this. I just have an addictive personality. That's a lie that people believe. Or even if it's true that they have an addictive personality, they believe a secondary lie, which is I have an addictive personality and I can't control it.